Welcome to Lesson 2 of this course on Data Security and Anonymization in Open Data Projects. In the previous lesson, we explored why responsible publication requires both openness and protection. This lesson looks more closely at what actually makes data identifiable. In the previous lesson, we established that responsible publication depends not only on openness, but also on protection. We also saw that removing names is not enough if people can still be identified in other ways. This lesson takes the next step by looking more closely at what actually makes data identifiable. At this point in the course, we move from general concepts to a more practical question. What in a dataset actually creates identifiability? This understanding is essential because later decisions about anonymization only make sense if we first recognize where the risk comes from. A useful starting point is to separate different kinds of information in a dataset. This part of the lesson focuses on the core concepts, the kind of identifiers we see in a dataset, why uniqueness matters, and how re-identification risk can survive even when direct identifiers are removed. The first step is to distinguish between three different kinds of information. First, direct identifiers point straight to a person, such as a name or ID number. Second, indirect identifiers do not identify a specific person on their own, but they may do so in combination. These are often called quasi-identifiers. Third, sensitive attributes may not identify a person by themselves, but they can still create serious risk if linked to an identifiable individual. In practice, open data risk often comes from the interaction between indirect identifiers and sensitive attributes. GDPR Recital 26 makes clear that identifiability should be assessed in light of means reasonably likely to be used, including singling out. That distinction becomes easier to understand when all three categories appear in the same small example. This example shows why removing one obvious identifier may not be enough. Once the name is removed, the remaining record may still be unique. In a small municipality, an 88-year-old person with a rare combination of attributes may still be easy to recognize. And once the person is identifiable, the condition becomes linked to them as well. This is why identifiability is often a question of combination, not just of one field. Once we understand the types of variables involved, the next step is to look at the mechanisms of re-identification. In practice, people are often not identified by one field alone, but through a process of linking, isolating, or inferring. There are several common ways this can happen. Re-identification does not always mean finding a name directly. It can also happen by linking records across datasets, singling someone out because their profile is unusual, or inferring sensitive information from a very small group. The UK Information Commissioner's Office guidance explains that information may fail to be anonymous if someone can isolate a person or link the data with other information. It also describes this as the mosaic or jigsaw effect. In public sector settings, local knowledge can matter as much as technical analysis. A person may be identifiable because colleagues, neighbors, or community members already know enough to connect the dots. A well-known research finding makes that point especially visible. One influential study on human mobility showed just how identifying behavior patterns can be. The researchers found that in a large mobility dataset, 4 spatiotemporal points were enough to uniquely identify 95% of individuals. The important lesson for open data teams is not the exact percentage alone. It is the broader message. Patterns of movement, timing, and place can be highly unique even when names are absent. The logic is highly relevant for transport data, mobility traces, service use records, or any dataset with detailed time and location information. The same logic appears in many public datasets, especially when they are small, local, or highly detailed. After looking at identifiers and re-identification mechanisms, we can now turn to a practical question for public bodies and open data teams. Which kinds of datasets tend to create higher risk in real publication contexts? This is where the lesson becomes especially practical for municipalities and open data teams. Not all publication risks are personal data risks, but in this lesson we focus specifically on identifiability. Generally, risk often grows with granularity. The more precise the place, time, category, or event detail, the easier it may be to recognize someone. That does not mean detailed data is always impossible to publish. It means teams should be specifically careful when datasets are small, local, precise, or unusually rich in variables. A quick practice task helps turn that into a more concrete skill. This lesson focused on what makes data identifiable in practice. The main point is that risk often comes from combinations, uniqueness, and contexts, not only from obvious identifiers. That understanding gives us a stronger basis for the next lesson, where we look at GDPR, anonymized data, and the wider governance responsibilities around publication. It is also worth keeping in mind that not all open data risks are personal data risks. Some datasets may be non-personal and still require caution because of security or misuse concerns. The next lesson places these practical insights in their wider legal and governance context.